opposite view, saying, well, no, actually, institutions are great, and the government doing many good things, and we need sort of authority and structures. Well, no. He says, as you will see in a minute, that Chomsky is not going far enough in his critique. So that's what I want to sort of get a sense. But equally important, I want you just to think how weird it is for us that two intellectuals meet in a television studio and for an hour talk about philosophy in front of an audience. That doesn't really happen. That was the reality TV of the 70s. And also, I think it's very important to notice how Foucault and Chomsky dressed differently. Because what you wear and what you think are not completely separate things. So pay attention to the body language as much as you pay attention to what they say. Let's start with which one is good? Maybe this. Well, we start from this and then we'll see.
Toen Galilei in de 17e eeuw ontdekte dat de aarde om de zon draaide in plaats van omgekeerd, was dat voor veel mensen een grote schok. Zij hadden tot dan toe de overtuiging gehad dat de mens in het centrum van de kosmos stond. En ze hadden daarop ook een gehele levensovertuiging gebouwd. En nu bleek dat ineens niet het geval te zijn. De theorie van Foucault kan men verduidelijken door vast te stellen dat hij eigenlijk met betrekking tot de cultuur een soort van Galilei-standpunt inneemt.
We just cut to the chase.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome at the fourth debate.
It's good, no? It just looks like a clip from ABBA. Okay, ready? Good.
Of the International Philosophers Project. Tonight's debaters are Mr. Michel Foucault, of the College of France, and Mr. Noam Chomsky of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Both philosophers have points in common and points of difference. Perhaps the best way to compare both philosophers is to look at them as mountain diggers working at the opposite sides of the same mountains with different tools, without knowing even if they are working in each other's direction. All learning concerning man, ranging from history to linguistics and psychology, are faced with the question whether in the last instance we are the product of all kinds of external factors, or if in spite of our differences we have something we could call a common human nature by which we can call each other human beings. So my first question is to Mr. Chomsky, because you, Mr. Chomsky, employ often the concept of human nature, and even in this connection you are using terms like innate ideas and innate structures. Which arguments can you derive from linguistics in order to give such a central position to this notion of human nature?
Well, let me begin in a slightly technical way. A person who's interested in studying language is faced with a very definite empirical problem. He's faced with an organism, a mature, let's say adult speaker, who has somehow acquired an amazing range of abilities which enable him in particular to say what he means, to understand what people say to him, to do this in a fashion that I think it's proper to call highly creative. Now, the person who's acquired this intricate and highly articulated and organized collection of abilities the collection of abilities that we call knowing language, that person has been exposed to a certain experience. He has been presented in the course of his lifetime with a certain amount of data, of direct experience with the language. And we can investigate the data that's available to this person. And having done so, in principle, we're faced with a very clear and a reasonably clear and well-delineated scientific problem, namely the problem of accounting for the gap between the really quite small quantity of data, small and rather degenerate quantity of data that's presented to the person, to the child, and the very highly articulated, highly systematic, profoundly organized, resulting knowledge that he somehow derives from this data. Furthermore, even more remarkable, we notice that in a wide range of languages, in fact all that have been studied seriously, there are remarkable limitations on the kinds of systems that emerge from the very different kinds of experience to which people are exposed. Well, there's only one possible explanation for, what one can say in a rather schematic fashion, for this remarkable phenomenon, namely the assumption that the individual himself contributes a good deal, an overwhelming part, in fact, of the general schematic structure and perhaps even of the specific content of the knowledge that he ultimately derives from his very scattered and limited experience. That is, to put it rather loosely, the child must begin with the knowledge, certainly not with the knowledge that he's hearing English or Dutch or French or something else, but he does start with the knowledge that he's hearing a human language of a very narrow and explicit type that permits a very small range of variation. And it's because he begins with that highly organized and very restrictive schematism that he's able to make the huge leap from scattered and degenerate data to highly organized knowledge. And I would claim then that this instinctive knowledge, if you like, this schematism that makes it possible to derive complex and intricate knowledge on the basis of very partial data, is one fundamental constituent of human nature. But then I assume that in other domains of human intelligence and other domains of human cognition and even behavior, something of the same sort must be true. Well, the collection of this mass of innate schematisms, innate organizing principles, which guides our social and intellectual and individual behavior, that's what I mean to refer to by the concept of human nature.
Well, Mr. Foucault, if I'm thinking at your books like Histoire de la folie and the Moelle choses, I got the impression that you are working on a completely different level and also just with an opposite aim, opposite goal. If I'm thinking about the word schematism in relation to domination, then you are just trying to work out that there are several periods, several schematisms. What do you think about this?
Well, if you permit, I will answer in French because my English is so bad that I would be ashamed to answer. Là, il est vrai que je me méfie un peu de cette notion de nature humaine. Et je m'en méfie pour la raison suivante. Je crois que parmi les concepts, parmi les notions dont une science peut se servir, il y a évidemment des notions qui sont d'un niveau, qui ont une élaboration, qui est d'une fonction différente. Par exemple, prenons le cas de la biologie. À l'intérieur, dans le domaine de la biologie, vous avez des concepts qui sont plus ou moins bien établis, comme le concept de réflexe. Et puis, vous avez d'autres notions qui sont en quelque sorte des notions périphériques. Des notions périphériques qui ne jouent pas un rôle, en quelque sorte, organisateur à l'intérieur de la science, des concepts qui ne sont pas des instruments d'analyse, des concepts qui ne sont pas descriptifs non plus. Ce sont des notions en quelque sorte qui servent simplement à indiquer des problèmes ou encore qui servent à indiquer des domaines d'objets à étudier. Prenez par exemple, il y a une notion comme ça qui, je crois, était très importante dans l'histoire de la biologie. C'est tout simplement la notion de vie. Bon, au XVIIe ou au XVIIIe siècle, les gens qui étudiaient la nature ne se servaient pas du concept de vie. Ils classaient les êtres naturels, qu'ils soient vivants ou non vivants, dans une espèce de grand tableau ou de grande hiérarchie. La vie était une notion dont ils ne se servaient pas et dont ils n'avaient pas besoin. Et puis, à la fin du XVIIIe siècle, un certain nombre de problèmes se sont posés.
I want to skip and go to the second part, where they discuss justice versus power. I think it is this one. I mean, I really think you should watch it completely. The whole thing is about an hour, because you will get quite a lot from the whole discussion. But at the moment, I just want to show you the two very different approaches. But you can almost get it just from what they wear. So Chomsky is dressed like your typical college professor. Yeah, it's the jacket, the tie, the shirt, not a suit, because that would be a clerk, that would be a banker. But this sort of, you know, the more kind of open, soft fabrics, you know, a little color, and then you have Foucault, who is completely, well, he's a skinhead first, and he's wearing this polo neck, and this jacket, and this ring glasses. I think it's just fantastic, you know, this. You already see in that how the convention of what constitutes a university college lecture is for him a problem. Yeah, he rejects that in favor of something that is much more, well, kind of left bank. Yeah, artistic, you would say, more bohemian, more radical. Yeah, because revolutionaries were this kind of, you know, revolutionaries don't wear ties. Yeah, and you would not ever see Foucault wearing a tie. There is a very strong political statement just in that, and I think to me it's almost as important as the things they are saying. Let's see if this gets us closer to the point.
Well, let me begin by referring to something that I've already discussed. That is, if it is correct, as I believe it is, that a fundamental element of human nature is the need for creative work, for creative inquiry, for free creation without the arbitrary limiting effects of coercive institutions, then of course it will follow that a decent society should maximize the possibilities for this fundamental human characteristic.
What do you say now? You pay attention?
Decent society, what is...
Good. Decent society is a good point. He's saying human nature is creative. Therefore, good society will do what? Will create conditions for this creativity to flourish. Okay? So I'm just stopping here to give you a preface. So you see
To be realized. That means trying to overcome the elements of repression and oppression and destruction and coercion that exist in any existing society, ours for example, as a historical residue. Now, a federated, decentralized system of free associations incorporating economic as well as social institutions would be what I refer to as anarcho-syndicalism, and it seems to me that it is the appropriate form of social organization for an advanced technological society.
Okay, did you pay attention? What is the model? What what Chomsky is proposing. Are you paying attention? Exactly, yeah. He says, well, instead of having this big government, let's have what is known as anarcho-syndicalism. Small groups of people coming together without any centralized system. You know, he says in that way, people will have more opportunity to live creatively, less oppressed, less being told what to do. Okay? Now, I want you to hear that this is quite radical. Yeah? It basically says, we don't need government, we don't need the party. Yes?
That means that we don't need basic education, like this one, for instance?
Well, that's a question to ask Chomsky. I don't know. But this is, in a sense, it's not so much about Chomsky. As you know, we're not reading Chomsky. What I want you to appreciate is, in order to understand where Foucault is coming from, I want you to see how progressive or ostensibly progressive is the other side. Yeah? What Chomsky is putting on the table is usually considered very radical. Yeah? Because here you have this sort of scale with centralized government on the one side, yeah? And on the other end of it is anarchy. Yeah? And Chomsky is here. Now, how are you going to argue with that? Where are you going to go? Yeah? So I want you to see what Foucault is making out of Chomsky's argument. And you will see that when it comes to Foucault, by that time, he's already really, really angry.
Human beings do not have to be forced into the position of tools, of cogs in the machine, in which the...
Do you hear? Human beings are not cogs in the machine. They shouldn't be serving a big government. They shouldn't be part of a big society. That's great, no? Maybe not. No. Maybe you might disagree.
creative urge, that I think is intrinsic to human nature, will in fact be able to realize itself in whatever way it will. I don't know all the ways in which it will.
Je suis dans ma démarche beaucoup moins avancée, je vais beaucoup.
And this is a lesson to you all. The best way to demolish your opponent is say, well, I'm much less advanced than you. This is checkmate.
Moins loin que M. Chomsky, c'est-à-dire que j'avoue n'être pas capable de définir, une plus forte raison, de proposer un modèle de fonctionnement social idéal pour notre société scientifique ou technologique. En revanche, une des tâches qui me paraît urgente, immédiate, avant même toute autre chose, c'est celle-ci. On a l'habitude, du moins dans notre société européenne, de considérer que le pouvoir, il est localisé entre les mains du gouvernement et il s'exerce par un certain nombre d'institutions bien particulières qui sont l'administration, en France on appelle ça préfectorat, je ne sais pas comment on dit mieux, l'administration, la police, l'armée. On sait que toutes ces institutions-là sont faites pour transmettre les ordres, les faire appliquer et punir les gens qui n'obéissent pas. Mais je crois que le pouvoir politique, il s'exerce encore, il s'exerce en outre, de plus, par l'intermédiaire d'un certain nombre d'institutions qui ont l'air comme ça de n'avoir rien de commun avec le pouvoir politique, qui ont l'air d'en être indépendantes et qui ne le sont pas. On sait bien que l'université, d'une façon générale, tout le système scolaire, qui en apparence est fait simplement pour distribuer le savoir, on sait que cet appareil scolaire est fait pour maintenir au pouvoir une certaine classe sociale et exclure des instruments du pouvoir toute une autre classe sociale. Quelque chose comme la psychiatrie, qui en apparence aussi n'est destiné qu'au bien de l'humanité et à la connaissance des psychiatres, la psychiatrie est encore une certaine manière de faire peser un pouvoir politique sur un groupe social, la justice également. Bon, et il me semble que la tâche politique actuelle dans une société comme la nôtre, c'est de critiquer le jeu des institutions apparemment les plus neutres et les plus...
This is the key. And I stop here because I want you to read the subtitles. To criticize the workings of institutions that appear to be both neutral and independent. That is the task. That is the real political task. Not to criticize those institutions that obviously hold power, like the party, the police, the bureaucracy, but to infiltrate and expose the way power operates in systems and organizations that appear benign, that appear benevolent, that appear neutral, like education, or the university system, or the kindergarten system, or psychiatry. Yet the sort of institutions that manifestly, overtly, simply are interested in improving the fate, the lot of mankind. Yet Foucault is saying it is these transparent, innocent institutions, children TV programs, that operate in a way that it is through these institutions that power flows in very particular ways, and in a sense, even more so because we do not notice how it is done. Yes, 3 more seconds.
De les critiquer, de l'attaquer de telle manière que la violence politique qui s'exerçait obscurément en eux surgisse et pour qu'on puisse lutter contre elle. À vouloir tout de suite, enfin si on cherche tout de suite à donner le profil et la formule de la société future, sans avoir bien fait la critique de tous les rapports de violence politique qui s'exercent dans notre société, on risque de les laisser se reconstituer, même à travers des formes aussi nobles, apparemment aussi.
This is a point we discussed many times in the past, if you remember around this table, that it's coming from something Marx was talking about in the 19th century, that every revolution plants the seeds of its own destruction. Every revolution recreates the systems of power it tries to demolish. Yeah? That is the danger that Foucault is saying that, yeah, you can aspire for this anarcho-syndicalist form of society without central government. But if you did not examine the way power really operates, you will end up recreating the same mechanisms you have been fighting against. Yeah? An example of that are everywhere. Movements that began, movements that wrote on their flag, liberation, freedom, equality, end up setting up secret police, to fight the people who somehow are, not as supportive of all these things, liberation, freedom, equality. So Foucault is saying this is the urgent task. The urgent task is in examining the mechanisms by which power operates and is being distributed, and it is not confined to this, the visible targets. So in a sense,
Celle du syndicalisme fasciste.
Yes, I would certainly agree with.
okay, I think this is enough because I want to move to our text. Just want you to get the sense and the measure of the man, because I think you study people well if you have an emotional connection with them, and for me, Foucault is incredibly interesting person to philosopher to study. Somehow there are very few people whom I keep reading over and over again without ever feeling that I read enough. And Foucault is definitely one of them. Okay, so today we want to talk about one aspect of Foucault work to do specifically with the things he's talking about here, the invisible mechanisms of power, and specifically how power relates to the visual field. Well, obviously we are dealing with photography, that is generally considered kind of the dominant vehicle of visual communication, or viscom, as it's sometimes called. So it is interesting for us to see what Foucault is saying about the visual field as one of these territories, one of these areas where power operates in a way that is hard to notice and hard to criticize because it is, well, invisible. Okay, the way I thought we can do it is by reading a couple of passages from the Discipline and Punish. You okay?
Just because he's criticizing a position that actually hasn't ever existed in modern Western
True.
civilization.
Foucault, you mean? Yeah. True.
And I kind of think, well, you can't diss something that does not exist or has not existed. It has existed before, and it does exist in other societies, not Western societies, but it just seems to.
Well, it's not that he's criticizing this specific form of the social organization. He says all forms of social organization will end up to be.
That's what I'm saying. How can you make that statement if you've not had that?
He says why? No, because it's not empirical. He says why? Because he says that all forms of social organization will always operate with power. Power is always present in forms of social organization. And if we do not examine exactly and specifically how power operates, we will always end up with systems that are restrictive and oppressive. That is his argument. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I understand his argument. I just don't understand how you can make an assertion regarding.
Because he says, well, Chomsky brought in the notion of the anarcho-syndicalism as potentially a better model. Now, Chomsky also did not build a society like this.
No.
Yeah, they both talk about what might work. And Foucault is saying, well, but even if you build this society, you will end up with the same institutions you now criticize because you did not examine how power operates. So what doesn't make sense?
No, it makes sense. I'm just saying he cannot make, in making a statement, that is a very hard statement to make without having the evidence to support that actually.
But the evidence.
No, because the evidence in reality outside of modern Western civilizations is that is reality. There are several examples of societies that do live within small communities without centralized society, without having these problems. And he's saying that everyone will have it. We have it. It's just in modern Western civilization, there's not an example of that, but in many other civilizations there are.
And you think that in this civilization that you're talking about, there's really no oppression, and there is really personal freedom, and there are no systems of control?
Within their own society, again, it depends on how you define systems of control and oppression. Within that society, they function within that society outside of what we consider to be oppression or control. How am I to say, oh no, that's oppressive?
I think that into the same society, into this our society, outside of the Western civilization, also they are facing this kind of oppression into their own civilization. It's not just because it is Western, it's because I think it's more open, you know, it's more, this happens in every society around the world, in my point of view, because even going into the indigenous people who have their own rules, they are ruled by the king, you know.
Yeah.
So they
For
have this,
example,
yeah,
maybe.
but
Even though I can.
it's not maybe, that is a
No,
reality.
not for everyone. though.
Also
The
for
newest, for example, the newest society do not have centralized government at all. There is no king.
But also they have religions, they have beliefs, and once you have religion, you have belief, you are oppression for something, for your own beliefs, you
But
know?
again, you are using white oppression. No, because we're bringing this language to people. There are societies that don't even have a word for oppression. They don't have these binary concepts. I'm just saying that it's very.
I think what you're saying really makes a lot of sense, and there is definitely a Western bias in this whole discussion. There's no doubt about that, and they really both speak about Western society. I think Foucault actually explicitly said that. So the bias you're talking about is definitely present, and I don't think neither Foucault or Chomsky. Well, I don't know. Do they make universal claims? Do they say that is always that? That certainly wouldn't be Foucault saying that it always, in every instance, in every historical period, things are the same, because Foucault is actually incredibly aware to the way things change geographically, historically, due to climate, due to time period. But the more important point is that whenever there is human society, there will be power operating between individuals and groups. And Foucault is saying we need to examine how power operates. Yeah? Now, is it possible to have a society without power? Foucault will say no, it's not possible. And because power will always somehow be there, because power basically means that there is a way, there is a way for one person to influence another, there is a way to create some certain limitations, certain ways of organizing behaviors, and because power is always present, Foucault says the most urgent task for any society is to examine how power operates. But what he says, and that is a really important point, I think it's actually, for Foucault, it would be the task in coming to think about any society. The important point here is that power is not where you think it is. Power is not only located in the king or the priest or the shaman or paterfamilia. Power operates on all levels and in all directions. You know, there is of course power relationship between me and you in this class. I am the teacher, you are the students. That's quite obvious. Yeah, you argue with me because you contest, for instance, the authority of what I say, and that's great. But Foucault is saying there is also power networks between you, all of you, that you might not be aware of. You know, you might think that because you are, sorry?
Even in ourselves, maybe.
Perhaps, yes, even in our own bodies, yes. In the way we understand our desires, our health, even as you say, Julie, very true, even within our own body, there are power relations. And Foucault is saying it is these invisible networks of power that are more urgent to examine than the visible ones. I suggest that we read, before we go to the Panopticism, I wanted to start from the first page, very famous first page from Discipline and Punishment. Now, just to give you a little bit of a background, in the essay Panopticism, which we're going to look at today, Foucault is putting forward the argument that in contemporary Western society, contemporary meaning roughly beginning from the 17th century onwards, the main form of control shifts from punishment to discipline. So he says, in the previous pre-industrial society, how what was the mechanism to make sure people do what they're supposed to do? The mechanism was punishment. It's a bit like, you steal something, we're going to cut your arm. You run away from your, if you're, let's say, a peasant or a serf and you run away from the farm, we will cut your leg. If you spoke badly about the king, we will cut your tongue. If you listen to someone who spoke badly about the king, we will cut your ear. If you saw something you shouldn't look at, we will poke your eye out. That was the normal punishment. Punishment was cruel, physical, painful, and visual. That's how people were made to behave, by fear of physical pain and death. And Foucault says that all carried on until at certain point something shifts and suddenly people are not kept in check, or society is not anymore based on this fear of punishment. Something else is making us behave, and he calls it Panopticism. And that is the modern way of making sure that people do what they're supposed to, and that is achieved through discipline. And the whole discussion is how discipline is established through setting up a visual field of surveillance. Do you know what surveillance is? Yeah? Surveillance, what does it mean to survey? To survey is to observe. Yeah? So for instance, the class is organized in a way that I'm sitting here, I can survey all of you. You cannot see everyone in the way that I can see all of you. So if some of you are at the moment on Facebook or doing something you're not supposed to do, or eating, I don't know what things you might be doing. I am in a position to see that. You are not placed in a way that allows you to see everything the way I can see. Yeah. So there is a kind of already in the way the visual field of the classroom is organized, is designed in a way that allows the teacher a field of surveillance over the students. We could think of another design that will avoid that. Some people sit in a circle. Clearly, when everyone sits in a circle, there's no one person who sees more than everyone else. Yeah? But this is, or think, for instance, have you ever been to a hospital ward? Hospital ward, 8 beds, 4 on one side, 4 on the other, and a little desk for the nurse. The nurse, sitting there at the desk, can see everyone. The patients, though, they have these little partitions between them. They cannot see anything. They can hardly even see the nurse. Yeah? So this one person can keep an eye on everything that is going on. Yeah? That's surveillance. That's what Foucault will be developing. So before we move on to that, let's first read the opening page of the Discipline and Punish to see what is, how it was before the modern era. Now, who could read? It's a bit dark here, but I also want to show you something. Who could read from? You don't have this text, so you need to. Who could read to us a couple of paragraphs? We will need very clear reading, and I'm going to show you something at the same time. So, who could read? Okay. Do you have enough light there?
Yeah.
All right. So, read to us from here, from the title. Yeah. Just start from the quote. I will be playing to you a scene from a film, which you probably know. So you have both to listen and to watch, but I will talk to you without sound. Okay, are you ready to begin?
Yep.
Go for it.
The body of the condemned. On a March 1757 Damiens, the regicide was condemned to make the amended honorable before the main door of the church of Paris, where he was to be taken and conveyed in a cart wearing nothing but a shirt, holding a torch of burning wax weighing 2 pounds. Then, in the said cart, to the place de grave, where on a scaffold that will be erected there, the flesh will be torn from his breasts, arms, thighs, and calves with red-hot pincers. His right hand, holding the knife with which he committed the said parricide, burnt with sulfur, and, on those places where the flesh will be torn away, poured molten lead, boiling oil, burning resin, wax, and sulfur melted together, and his body drawn and quartered by 4 horses, and his limbs and body consumed by fire, reduced to ashes, and his ashes thrown to the winds. Finally, he was quartered, recounts the Gazette de Amsterdam of 1st April 1757. This last operation was very long, because the horses used were not accustomed to drawing. Consequently, instead of 4, 6 were needed, and when that did not suffice, they were forced, in order to cut off the wretch's thighs, to sever the sinews and hack at the joints. It is said that, though he was always a great swearer, no blasphemy escaped his lips, but the excessive pain made him utter horrible cries, and he often repeated, "My God, have pity on me. Jesus, help me." The spectators were all edified by the solicitude of the parish priest of St. Paul's, who, despite his great age, did not spare himself in offering consolation to the patient.
Okay, let's stop here for a second. Do you want to carry on? It goes on for a while. Oh, you get the idea? Yeah? Okay, so this is, what was the date of this?
1757.
1757, yeah? That is description of a public execution of Damien the regicide. Yeah, so Damien was attempted to assassinate the king, and as you heard, his punishment, as they say, the punishment should befit the crime. Yeah. So the hand with which he was trying to stop the king was they poured molten lead on it, and then they chop his body, and then he gets quartered, by which it means that 4 horses pull his arms and legs, and the idea is that they will just disintegrate and just pull the legs of the chicken. That was the punishment, and it is also a public spectacle. Yeah, so it's a big day in the city. It is taking place in the major plaza. It is an execution as a form of public entertainment. Okay. The same, by the way, is from Braveheart. Yeah. You see, it's really, I think, probably they used Foucault's description as a storybook. It just matches point to point. Okay. Now. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is another film which has a very different approach to the whole notion of control or power. Yeah. So, I mean, Chomsky started when in Chomsky-Foucault debate, we started to talk about power. Yeah. And as you saw in this clip from Braveheart and what then was reading, that was a very clear example of the way power operates. Yeah? So the power of the state basically says, don't mess with us, because you will come to a very, very bitter end. We have the power not only to kill you, that would be easy, but we can kill you in the most torturous, horrible way in front of a large audience it is very, very scary, right? So basically the lesson is, for anyone there observing this execution, is look, if you ever try to do something which is outside the norm, that's what will happen. Yeah? So it's a very stern warning. Okay. So the next film is Shawshank Redemption. You know? Sorry? Of course, it's on television every day. Okay. This is just the first, the very famous first night scene. Let's have a look.
Lights out!
I remember my first night. Seems like a long time ago. The boys always go fishing with first-timers. And they don't quit till they reel someone in.
Fat ass. Fat ass. Talk to me, boy. I know you there, I can hear you breathing. I know you listen to these nitwits, you hear me? This place ain't so bad. Tell you what, I'll introduce you around, make you feel right at home. I know a couple of big old bull queers that just love to make your acquaintance. Especially that big white mushy butt of yours. God, I don't belong here. I want to go home. And it's fat ass by a nose. Where's fish? Where's fish? Where's fish? I want to go home. I don't want my mother. What the crisis is happening on the ship? You don't belong to me. I'm telling you what. You'll be telling them about the tonic, your ass. What is your malfunction, you fat barrel of monkey spunk? Please. I ain't supposed to be here. Not me. I ain't gonna count to 3. I'm not even gonna count to 1. You will shut the fuck up or I'll sing you a lullaby. Please. Man, shut up. You don't understand. I'm not.
Okay. That's enough. The most important thing here is actually that first frame. Because here, I just want you to kind of see the difference between these two scenes, between Braveheart and Shawshank Redemption. In Braveheart, it was all about the spectacle, it was all public, it was all about overt cruelty. So this is all, first it's all within the prison. No one knows what happens outside. And from outside, the prison looks like another big Victorian building. Brick walls, you know, some little towers, fields, trees. Yeah, nothing, there's no gallows, you know, there's no like crows flying overheads, you know. Nothing of what happens inside is manifest outside in any way. That's the first thing. And then notice how the prison is organized. So there are all these rows, corridors, and the cells, and every cell is basically 3 walls, and the front wall is these metal bars. Yeah? So for the guard who is walking in the middle, everyone is visible. There is nowhere to hide. Now, did you see Shawshank Redemption?
Yes.
Did you see it? Yeah? As you probably know in the film, the only way the hero could hide, could dig a tunnel, was to hang a poster of Rita Hayworth on the wall and dig the tunnel behind the poster. Yeah, so he found a way to somehow make himself invisible in a space that really, where there is nowhere to hide. But it's a failure. In reality, the prison is organized in a way that you are all the time surveyed. There's nowhere you can escape. There's nowhere you can hide. Yeah. So now, it's not about asking what system is better or more humane or more progressive. Yes.
I think that it's actually the same, because when it comes to the electric stool, I don't know the English.
Electric chair.
Yeah.
Electric chair. It's a public spectacle too.
You are absolutely right. Yeah, there is this dimension as well.
Well, it's only for like certain people, like the family of whoever was killed, you know, or whoever, you know, was the crime was committed against. Yeah, like they only allow like a certain group of people to see it, I guess, for the closure or something.
Okay.
But yeah,
But anyway, it's focused, because if you allow just enter people, it doesn't matter if it's just few or a lot,
Yeah.
it becomes public.
yeah, good point.
But I mean, the punishment in the chairs, electric chairs, for some crimes, right? So other crimes are just like kind of punishment should be people in the cells. It's not for everybody, like would be.
But I don't understand that.
Because in any change, in a sense, it changed. But yes, if you keep having this dimension for some crimes, but not for all the crimes and not in all the societies. Do you understand? Just that I'm saying it's not the punishment for everybody. It's like torture in public. It's not for
Yeah, but anyway, you are in prison. Outside there is a world that is looking to that prison, you know, and they know that inside of that building there is people.
So there is a helpful, there is the Foucault.info website, and they have this very helpful diagram of how a prison, a panoptic prison, might look like. And actually, I think this is a real prison in where it is in somewhere in Pennsylvania. You see how it is organized. These are all these rows of cells, just like in the film we watched. And there is a central tower with essentially with a single guard or a couple of guards inside. Now, the way the prison is set up, and the inventor of this model of prison was a British philosopher, Jeremy Bentham. Have you heard? Yeah. His most famous expression, his most famous slogan was the greatest good for the greatest number. Yeah, that was his criterion for devising instruments of the state. So, in his opinion, a good state will strive for the greatest good for the greatest number. And he came up with this model for a possible. He was an improver, so he wanted also to improve the Victorian prison system. And he said it would be much more efficient if the prison would be organized in that way. And when he, in his description, he says there will be this, like kind of coliseum with cells with walls between them, and bars on one side and a window on the other. So there is light coming through the cell, which means that when you are standing here in the middle, you can see through every cell, yeah? So, but what is really important here, and that is the genius of Bentham here, that when you are the prisoner in one of these cells, you are seen by the guard, but you cannot see the guard. Yeah? Because you cannot see the guard, because you cannot really see if the guard is facing you or not, you never know whether you are observed or not. Because you don't know whether you are observed or not, the only thing you can assume is that you are always observed. Because you assume that you are always observed, you always behave as if you are observed. So in a sense, you end up being your own guard. Do you understand? Yeah? So it's a little bit like we have these CCTV cameras dotted all around the city, all around London. We don't really know whether they actually film something or not. These days they're all digital. But we don't know if someone is really looking at the screen connected to this camera right now. But because we don't know that, we always assume that someone does. Yeah? So, now, I think we are maybe in a better position to go to the Panopticism section. Do you have the text? Because I was looking for it on the on our folder and I didn't find it.
I googled it.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I am finding it, but it's the other section. Can you send it to me?
The reader or the punishment?
The Panopticism section.
That's in the reader.
It's the one that says that starts from discipline, may be identified neither with an instruction. Do you want to take a quick break?
Yes.
Okay. So if you can send it to me, I will send it out. 5 minutes? 10 minutes? 10 minutes. So this is really the... Okay, come in. Okay, so we are back in the session and we are talking about Panopticism. The concept Michel Foucault borrowed from the writings of Jeremy Bentham. And as I said earlier, in Bentham, the notion of the panoptic prison appears as an improvement, as basically a theoretical concept about how to make the prison better. Foucault took this concept from this 19th century utilitarian philosopher. Utilitarian, yeah, from the word utility, yeah, and that was Bentham's main aim: how to make things work better, how to make a prison more effective, yeah, that it requires less effort to manage. So it is more efficient. But Foucault took this notion of this panoptic prison and appropriated it in order to discuss how modern societies are organized in general. Now, what panopticism means, what panoptic means, in terms of just how the world is constructed. It's made of two parts, pan and optic, 3 parts. Pan and optic and ism. Yeah? Okay, what is pan?
Everybody.
Give me an example of another word that uses, or another expression that uses pan in that sense.
Pantheon.
Pantheon, okay. Pan American Airlines. I don't think they even in existence anymore, but All American Airline. Yeah? Okay, so pan means all. Optic means optic. Optic, the optical nerve. You put panoptic together and you get CO, all seeing. Yeah? Panoptic, all seeing. What isn't means? Good. Yes. The system of all seeing. The system of total observation. This is panopticism. You know the Big Brother house? You ever watched Big Brother? Yeah? Well, that is panopticism, and it's kind of the most, you would say, distilled form. In the Big Brother house, there are cameras installed in the bathroom, in the bedroom, in the toilet, in the kitchen. There's nowhere where you are not observed. You go into the bathroom to put makeup, you close the door, you want to have a good cry, you are on camera. You are always on camera. This is panopticism. Panopticism. Anyone here read Orwell's 1984? 1984, the famous Orwellian novel? Yeah? You remember there, I read it a long time ago, so I might be mistaken, but I think there is the television set is also observing you as you watch it. Yeah? These days, many people stick a piece of tape over the lens in the camera, in the computer, because it is watching you. So, for instance, I didn't take my phone today, but it is pretty clear that the phone is listening to you all the time. Your phone is listening to you all the time, or at least it can listen to you all the time. It definitely knows exactly where you've been. Yeah. Maybe you can switch it off, but no, if you ever used one of these digital personal assistants on your phone, yeah, like Siri or something like that. So you know that the way it works, the phone itself doesn't really have enough memory and enough computing power to transcribe what you say and understand it. But what it can do is to take your words, send them to the server where it gets processed, and then your query gets answered on your phone. Yeah? So that's another example of how panoptic society might work. It can be also, the panoptic society doesn't necessarily need to work with a visual, it can also work with a aural, with a hearing, with the acoustic, thank you. It can also work by just tracing where you went. It also can work by knowing where and how much cash you withdrew at any point. If, for instance, you use an Oyster card, yeah, or maybe these days it's probably the contactless. If you go to the TfL website, you can see all the journeys you made for the last, since records began. You might not remember where you've been, but they remember. Yeah? That's the panoptic society. Now, the argument Foucault is putting forward is that the age of modernity has a way of organizing power that is not based on physical, visible punishment, as we saw in the torture scene from Braveheart, but on discipline. Yeah? Now, Ebony, could you read to us? Let's just make sure that you don't mind. Can you do that? Can you read to us? Let's just make sure that everyone is on the same page. If you are looking at the reader, it is on page 207. I put it on Dropbox as well for us. So it's we are on the second page of the Panopticism section of Discipline and Punishment. So please, everyone, take it away. From one. Yeah.
Generally speaking, it might be said that the disciplines are techniques for ensuring the ordering of human multiplicities. It is true that there is nothing exceptional or even characteristic in this. Every system of power is presented with the same problem. But the peculiarity of the disciplines is that they try to define in relation to the multiplicities a tactics of power that fulfills three criteria. First, to obtain the exercise of power at the lowest possible cost. Economically, by the low expenditure it involves. Politically, by its discretion, its low exteriorization, its relative invisibility, the little resistance it arouses. Second, to bring the effects of this social power to the maximum intensity and to expend them as far as possible, without their failure or interval. Third, to link this economic growth of power with the output of the apparatuses, educational, military, industrial, or medical, within which it is exercised, in short, to increase both the docility and the utility of all elements of the system.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Very well read. Now, Ebony, the reason I wanted, one of the reasons I wanted to read it is because I think it somehow connects to the things Foucault was saying in the interview, in the conversation with Chomsky. And I wonder, how do you, what sense do you make of it? What do you hear him say? It might be said that disciplines are techniques for assuring the ordering of human multiplicities. Yeah? So, whenever you have a multiplicity, whenever you have a human society, the problem arises of how to order the society. Yeah? Some order is required. Yeah? Wood has to be brought to the village, the field has to be plowed, the animal has to be hunted or skinned. Something has to happen, right? Okay, the question is how that is ensured. Now we saw that in the pre-modern era that was done simply by brute force. Plow the field or we will flog you. Go mine the ore or you will starve. You know, the threat of physical punishment was the way to organize human society. And what Foucault is saying is that in the modern era, this way of organizing society became inefficient. Why? Well, maybe there are just too many people. How many you can flog? You know, you get tired in the day of flogging. There is another problem here, which is not only to do with the fact that societies are much larger, is that, we will see, he speaks about it in this chapter. So for instance, if you look at the Braveheart execution, so you have all this public observing, which on one hand is great because they all will get really scared of some similar thing happening to them. But on the other hand, also quite dangerous, because what if this whole mob suddenly decides that they like this guy? That maybe he's the new Jesus, and maybe what they need to do is to just jump onto this platform and rescue him and, you know, kill all the executioners. Yeah? So there is a kind of danger as well in making these kind of public spectacles that, and you have all these crowds and, you know, all these sort of passions and feelings flying high, and it's all really emotional it's kind of explosive mixture. It can be also quite dangerous for the power, much safer to conduct your business of discipline away from the public eye, like in Shawshank Redemption. But what is interesting here is that when Foucault comes to think about discipline, he says that, sorry, I have to change to my reading glasses. So he says that the peculiarity of the disciplines is that they try to define, in relation to the multiplicities, a tactics of power that fulfills three criteria: to obtain the exercise of power at the lowest possible cost. Yeah? So public executions are very expensive. Yeah? You need these highly skilled executioners, and it's only one person you're going to execute, and it takes a whole day. It's like picking up a big show. Second, to bring the effects of the social power to the maximum intensity and to extend them as far as possible without either failure or interval. So discipline has to be, or power has to be, economically efficient. It has to be continuous and uninterrupted. There shouldn't be any moments when power or discipline is not operating. And to link this economic growth of power with the output of the apparatuses within which it is exercised. And these apparatuses are educational, military, industrial, or medical. So basically, it's important that discipline is cheap, that it is continuous, and that it is pervasive in all institutions of life. Yeah? So here, in the classroom, you are in a disciplinary setup when, there is here the teacher, and there is a disciplinary framework within which you are doing your learning as you're supposed to. But when you leave the classroom, you don't enter a non-disciplined territory. You are still in a disciplinary environment. There is no teacher. There are other ways to make sure that your behavior is disciplined. There are surveillance cameras. There are swipe cards. There are people in the red berets that walk around the plaza and make sure that you don't distribute leaflets or don't do what you're not supposed to. Don't pour washing up liquid into the fountain. I want to say that because 2 years ago someone made an art project with that. Don't take it in the wrong way. Okay, so one aspect, you see, here is quite interesting. Who could read a little bit more first? Anyone? Robert? Thank you. Can you start from one aspect?
One aspect of this conjuncture was the large demographic thrust of the 18th century. An increase in the floating population, one of the primary objects of discipline, is to fix. It is an anti-nomadic technique. A change of quantitative scale in the groups to be supervised.
Sorry, I should move it when you read it.
A change of quantitative scale in the groups to be supervised or manipulated.
Okay, we get that. Yeah. So the first problem is you have many more people to control. So the old models of physical punishment just don't work on such big masses. Second problem, the other aspect.
The other aspect of the conjuncture was the growth in the apparatus of production, which was becoming more and more extended and complex. It was also becoming more costly, and its profitability had to be increased.
Okay, so what kind of apparatus of production is becoming more costly and more important he's talking about? Yeah, we are entering the industrial age. Yeah, so in the past, most people worked in agriculture, and most population lived in villages. Now, the industrial age, as you obviously know from reading Wikipedia or studying history in school, the industrial age is the gradual movement of people from the village to the city. Yeah, and in the city, people work in factories. Yeah, so then you have another problem. It's not about the field workers and the farmers and the peasants anymore. You have factory workers. They need to turn up to their shift at 6:30 in the morning, and they need all to perform specific tasks. The problem of the industrial society is to maintain continuous, uninterrupted production. Yeah, if you work a field, so if you don't work your field, well, okay, so we will not be able to perhaps, well, in the end, you will just starve if you don't work your field, but that you're not going to cause huge amount of damage. But if you are working in a factory and you break a machine or you sabotage production, you can cause considerable amount of economic damage. Yeah? So these problems of keeping people in check acquire a very heavy economic, financial significance. Yeah? That's why Foucault is saying is that the other aspect of the conjuncture is the growth of the apparatus of production. But we're going to move to the next. Okay, let's go to 208, because I think this is just a very nice sentence. Robert, can you read this?
For the old principle of levying violence, which govern the economy of power, the disciplines substitute the principle of mildness, production, profit.
Okay, so you see, the old principle is Braveheart. Violence. Yeah? The second, the new principle, is substitutes violence for mildness, production, profit. Yeah? That's interesting. Now, these, and he carries on to say, these are the techniques that make it possible to adjust the multiplicity of men and the multiplication of the apparatuses of production. And this means not only production in the strict sense, but also the production of knowledge and skills in the school, the production of health in hospitals, the production of destructive force in the army. Yeah? And now we're going to 2009, and here, can you also read this first?
In short, to substitute for a power that is manifested through the brilliance of those who exercise it, a power that insidiously objectifies those on whom it is applied, to form a body of knowledge about these individuals rather than to deploy the ostentatious signs of sovereignty.
This is very good. So it says, again, keep in mind the two films we saw. So, Braveheart, the brilliance of sovereignty. You know, the king or the bishop are so brilliant and omnipotent and powerful that they can literally crush you like an insect with their thumb. And in so doing, they can really show their omnipotent power. In the modern era, the ruler or the rulers are not so much interested in crushing you like that. They want to study you. They want to collect data about you. Big data, you know. We'll come to talk about it much more in the future when we get into the digital condition in earnest. But that's where it begins. So discipline, the distribution of power in modern society is not taking place through this spectacular crushing of the individual, but through collecting information and study of the masses. Yeah? To form a body of knowledge about these individuals. Yeah? And while, of course, the physical crushing of the traitor, of the rebel, is spectacular and incredibly crude, there is something quite chilling in this other option. Yeah? Forming a body of knowledge about these individuals.
But who is that who wants to form that body?
And that's what we're going to find out. Let's go to page 211. And okay, Julie, would you read to us? So we now moved in to look more directly at the panoptic model. So section, please.
The panoptic modality of power at the elementary, technical, merely physical level at which it is situated is not under the immediate dependence or a direct extension of the great juridical political structures of a society. It is nonetheless not absolutely independent. Historically, the process by which the bourgeois became, in the course of the 18th century, the politically dominant class was masked by the establishment of an explicit, coded, and formally egalitarian juridical framework made possible by the organization of a parliamentary representative regime.
Stop here for a second, Julie. So, what was the question you asked? Remind us.
Who is it who wants to create that body of?
Who executes this disciplinary power? And what is the answer Foucault is providing?
I mean, here he's talking about the 18th century, if I know. No?
The bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie and the okay, so, and that was a very, very good question, Julie, because what we called name Braveheart form of power, yeah, the I will crush you like an insect form of power, was suitable for a political regime that has the king or the pope or the bishop at the head. Yeah? But this regime, of this autocratic regime of centralized power located in the hands of the prince or the king, this regime was replaced after the French Revolution by the parliamentary model. Yeah? What happened after the French Revolution? You know? So the king found himself on the scaffold, and it is the head of the king that was chopped, and instead of the king, you had the People's Council. So basically a parliament, what we come to know called today a parliament, or a party, or elected representatives of the people. Now, it's just not becoming of the elected representatives of the people to punish in the same way that the king did. Yeah? The parliament just cannot really see itself doing this thing. You can see why. Yeah? Because the whole rhetoric of the parliament is that we don't want this absolute power in the hands of some tyrant. Therefore, another model is being developed that is invisible, based on collecting information and knowledge about individuals and groups of people, and it really operates through discipline rather than through violence. So,
and this is related again to the quote of every revolution recreates the system of power.
No. Well, yeah, you can say that, but this is not the point here. The point here is that the shift from theocracy or autocracy to democracy also brings forward a shift in how the society is being organized. In the past, in the autocratic period, let's generally call it the Middle Ages, yeah, it was about this punishment. Then we move to the modern era. The king is replaced by parliament, and the system of control is not punishment anymore, but discipline.
It will also be desire.
Sorry?
Be the desire. The
Desire.
The control. Because, for example, in the digital age, we are invited to have this desire, and in some way we have this desire, for example, to have a telephone, to have a computer. We have almost the need, but are not needs. But in order to live in the community, actually we must use technology. No, we're going to be out of everything. We cannot communicate, so it becomes something necessary that through the mechanism of these needs, they play on the need to communicate, to cut the distance, but no, it's a way to control. So through the desire, because it's the nearness could be somewhat considered a human desire. No, if I want to call
No, I think
parents.
You're right. And Foucault has another book about desire, and it's called The History of Sexuality, which is a fantastic book. It's in 3 volumes, where he makes exactly that argument. So yes, you're right. Desire is another form of control. However, here he is not speaking about desire as such. He's speaking about forms of about other forms of discipline. So
there's also the role of the church. Isn't the church in
how?
In that it controls the population and a sense of guilt and punishment and stuff.
Yeah, I think like in a digital age, like for instance, this desire of us like needing these telephones or needing a computer is like just systematically their way of securing their regime from collapsing. Like if they make us think that we need all these things, then we're going to buy into it whether or not we believe in it because we're supporting it. The same with the church. We want to go to heaven. We don't want to, end up in hell and a fiery death. So they're securing that with our devotion to this structure.
But it's something that
it's like job security.
You cannot avoid. You cannot. The church you can avoid some system, no. But
you can avoid the church.
The way how
you can avoid Facebook as well.
Is not Facebook. Its social network is different. I mean, just a simple telephone, a simple or I don't know. As soon as if you have to travel, the Oyster as well. No, there are stuff that you must have in order to go out from your home. Unless you live in
you can avoid, but it's much more difficult and much more time consuming. And when you live in such fast world, then efficiency comes into play. So you don't need to wait in a queue to buy a ticket with cash rather than card, which is one machine instead of 20, which takes that. So you have an Oyster card, which then. So you can avoid that, but society is organized in such a way that, for efficiency reasons, you choose not to. What would Foucault make of Twitter and Facebook?
Sorry?
What would Foucault make of Twitter and Facebook?
That's what you're going to write your research paper about.
I mean, I think it's the same reason that Facebook and all these like conglomerates buy up all the companies. Like as soon as they see that everyone wants something, like WhatsApp, they pay like 22 billion for it. You know, and I think that that's like it's no surprise that they would do such a thing because like Facebook clearly like has ties with the government, and the government has already sort of brainwashed them into feeding them information. So anytime something pops up where everyone wants it, they're like, oh no, now all of a sudden people are talking on WhatsApp, so Facebook buys WhatsApp. You know, Twitter buys Vine. Like they just, if an individual comes up with something that everyone wants to use, the conglomerates buy them
In
out.
some way, I think we cannot avoid as well the power because it's part of the human nature. The man is not.
No, carry on.
The man is not like a good person. The humankind is not an angel. We have many impulses. No? There are killers. There are many people different. So it's part, I think, of the human nature. This attention to this aim to have the power. We can change ourselves singularly, but speaking in a large way, we cannot avoid the chaos or the mechanism of control unless individually, but in an artistic utopia. I don't know.
I want to. I think I want to interrupt this conversation now because I want to show you something from Discipline and Punish, and then to move on to looking at some examples. I don't know if we should read the whole paragraph. Yeah. So, Simona, can you read?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe start. This is from Discipline and Punish. It's sadly the Panopticon section is not fully reprinted in the reader. This is from the whole book, but it's now on Dropbox as well, thanks to the people who sent me the PDF. Okay, and this is the last paragraph in the section on discipline. So please, Simona, what is now?
What is now conversed on penal justice as its point of application, its useful object will no longer be the body of the guilty man set against the body of the king.
Okay, I will just interrupt from time to time. You see, it's not the guilty against the power of the king anymore. Okay, carry on.
Nor will it be the juridical subject of an ideal contract. It will be the disciplinary individual. The extreme point of penal justice under the ancient regime was the infinite segmentation of the body of the regicide, a manifestation of the strongest power over the body of the greatest criminal, whose total destruction made the crime explode into its truth. The ideal point of penality today would be an indefinite discipline, an interrogation without end, an investigation that would be extended without limit to the meticulous and ever more analytical observation, a judgment that would at the same time be a constitution of a file that was never closed, the calculated leniency of a penalty that would be interlaced with the ruthless curiosity of an examination procedure that would be at the same time the permanent measure of a gap in relation to an inaccessible norm and the asymptotic movement that strives to meet in infinity. The public execution was the logical culmination of a procedure governed by the Inquisition. The practice of placing individual under observation is a natural extension of a justice imbued with disciplinary methods and examination procedures.
Great. Now we will continue in a second, but notice notice these two models: the public execution as the culmination of the power of the Inquisition, or the monarch, or the tyrant, or the king. Yeah, the Middle Ages. Okay, get it. Next one, modern age. the practice of placing individuals under observation. Where? In the hospital, on the gynecologist chair, in the psychiatrist clinic, in the counseling room, in the AA meeting. Okay? This form of observation is a natural extension of a justice imbued with disciplinary methods and examination procedures. Yeah? So where we had punishment in torture, now we have examination and collecting data. Please carry on.
It is surprising that the cellular prison with
No, start again. Is it surprising? Because this is the last two sentences. I think this is the absolute. Oops, it doesn't want to be. This is the absolute key.
Is it surprising that the cellular prison, with its regular chronologies, forced labor, its authorities of surveillance and registration, its experts in normality, who continue and multiply by the functions of the judge, should have become the modern instrument of penalty? Is it surprising that prisons resemble factories, schools, barracks, hospitals, which all resemble prisons?
That's great. Read the last sentence again.
Is it surprising that prisons resemble factories, schools, barracks, hospitals, which all resemble prisons?
Thank you very much. And this is really the point. Yeah? But I love this expression, experts in normality. Yeah? This is chilling. No? Who are these experts in normality? What do you think? Psychiatrists? Parents?
Psychology.
Yeah. Police? Teachers? Yeah. Doctors? Abnormal behavior? Abnormal? Normal? How do you know? What constitutes normality?
It's a statistic.
Is it statistic? Maybe statistics. Maybe it's not only statistics. Maybe
willingness to obey.
To obey. But I just think this expression, experts in normality. Curators? Are curators experts in normality? Is that what you're learning here to become? An expert in normality? But notice the last sentence. Is it surprising that prisons resemble factories, schools, barracks, hospitals, which all resemble prisons? What does it mean? On what level school resembles prison? What do you think? Why?
Because of the way it's structured.
And how it is structured?
Like you said, the teacher with the classroom.
Exactly. The teacher, the prison guard, the drill sergeant, the ward nurse. The model is always the same. You have a group of people observed and made to be normal or to behave in a normal way by the individual, yeah, who has the observational power. Yeah? And we are in this environment right now. Okay, so any questions so far? Yes.
What's the point leading to?
What is the point?
I mean, what's this leading to?
What do you think?
I don't know.
Why do you think it's leading to something? Maybe this is the point.
I just feel there's that lack.
So what?
To react.
What do you think?
To react.
Well, so you remember what Foucault said in the discussion with Chomsky? He said, power is not only operating in these familiar, visible sites. And this is direct response to you, Alexandra. Because Chomsky was saying, just to retract a little one step back, Chomsky was saying, we need to free people from the oppressive power of such institutions as the government, the police, the army, yeah, because they want people to be free and creative. Foucault kind of came back and said, we have another thing to think about, and that is that power is often exercised in environments that seem like they have nothing to do with power. And that can be a hospital, that's supposedly just there to make you feel better. You broke a leg, you go to the hospital, they put a plaster, you can walk again, you go home. It's not a place of power, just treating a wound. Foucault is saying, no. Power is exercised in the hospital in the same way as it's exercised in the school, in the army, in the factory. You don't just go to your place of work to do something. You are within this power structure. That is the point. The point is that power and discipline and control are not confined to places where it is visible. Power also operates in environments where it is not manifest. And then you need to be able to identify how power operates. Because if you have a policeman in the uniform, with the badges, with a walkie-talkie, clearly you know, okay, this is power. It's very easy to identify. But a nurse that walks in with a thermometer and takes your temperature, where is the power? It looks completely innocent. And Foucault is saying, no, there is power there as well. So that's actually a very good link, Alexandra, to the next part, where we're going to really look at an example, and maybe that will help to answer the question of what is the point. And that will be, so let's go here. Let's go to, now, do you know who is Isabella Rossellini? Yes. Can you tell us who she is?
No, I don't.
You don't know?
She's the daughter of another Rossellini. She's a director.
She's a director. She was a very famous actress. Do you know what films she starred in? Blue Velvet. David Lynch. Did you see Blue Velvet? Can you please see it? Blue Velvet. Blue Velvet. You must. It's not like that you must, but you will do well to see it. Now, she also was a supermodel, but in the last several years, she's been making these videos. And now, you might think that we completely change direction and deal with something else. We don't. This video is 3 minutes long. As you watch it, I want you to think, how would you link that to what we discussed so far?
If I were a bee, a queen bee, I would be very fat and do nothing else but lay eggs. The unfertilized eggs will hatch my sons, the fertilized eggs will hatch my daughters. If I were a daughter, I would be sterile, and I would do all the work. I would have antennas to help me hear, and pads on my feet to smell. I would have compound eyes to see everywhere, and I would be armed with a stinger for the fence. I have many sisters, and I communicate with them by dancing. I tell them where the flowers are. To one of my little sisters, I would feed the royal jelly that would make her fertile, and one day she would become the queen. If I were a male bee, I wouldn't have a father, and I would be called a drone. I would have many brothers, and we would do nothing, just waiting to have sex. A female, ready to mate. Sex! Brother would fight! I'm the strongest! I would fly after her. I would mate her in flight. It's our natural flight. But pulling out from her, oh, my penis would break off. It would get stuck in her vagina like a cork in a bottle. But it would prevent other males from mating with her. She will be queen. She would start a new colony with my babies. But I would die. Without my penis, I would bleed to death.
Okay, so what is the point?
That it's a system, like a process, like a machine.
In what way, what we read, what Foucault was saying, how that can help? Maybe it cannot, but is there a way to read what we just saw here? Okay, forget Foucault for a second. What we just saw, what was this 3-minute video about the bees? What was it about?
Society of bees.
Yes. Good.
Natural reproduction.
How?
They aim on the life to reproduce and they create society. In some way, it's an animal part, this organization.
Right. How it was told? How the story was told?
As we were taught. This starts with a
Right. But before that, how it was framed?
Hypothetically.
Yes. How it was framed, what it reminded you of.
like an education,
like a children's.
Okay, thank you. Okay, come on. Spell it, yes. Like what it reminded you of? Children television, correct? It does look like a children program, yeah? This sort of background made of a sheet, all these kind of paper cutouts. It is the whole sort of visual language. I mean, you are visual people, yeah? The whole visual language is of a children program. This is not a real bee egg. This is not a real bee sperm. It's all made of, I don't know, plastic and paper, yeah? Because it is an illustration. That's right? You agree with that? Okay. So, where do you, and because you could imagine David Attenborough making a program about bees mating. Yeah, do you know who is David Attenborough? You know, the famous naturalist who makes programs about nature. We could do that. I don't think we have the time for that. But you can imagine how, let's say, it could also be, you could have a film or a program about bees mating that would be, you know, done in the style of, let's say, National Geographic, you know, with this sort of close-ups and high-definition filming, you know, and how it, with real bees. Where are the bees in this film? There are no bees. Have you noticed that? Okay, well, you know, you need to be able to say these things, because when you come to describe your work in your essay, you need to start from saying what is actually there. Yeah? And let's say if your work is about bees, then have you approached it in the style of National Geographic? Or have you approached it in the style of children's television? That really matters. Because this is really the whole thing. So first, we agree that Isabella Rossellini here uses a visual style of children's television. Notice how it starts, yeah? Okay. Even that, you know, this kind of handwritten, yeah, what it tells you, what that suggests. Yes? It is for children, yeah, it is kind of like a teacher writing on the blackboard. That's what it looks like, blackboard, and writing in with color pencils. Okay, next.
If I were a bee, a queen bee.
Yeah, you see, what age is it pitched for? Who is the target audience?
0 to 5.
4, yeah, 0 to 5, okay. Okay, that's good answer. I'm asking you another question. Who is the target audience?
We.
Adults.
Good. Okay. Can you hold these two things together? 0 to 5 and we. Because that's exactly what makes that powerful. Because it's both for children and for us. For not for children. Yeah? How she manages to make something that is these two things at once. And what is it called when it is two things at once? When it is both for children and not for children. What is it called?
Multi-target?
Well, it's maybe, but I think that it's called art. I think it's called art. Because if it was simply a children program about bees, then it would be a children program about bees. But this is not that. This is a parody. Yeah? This is a pastiche. There is a kind of irony here. We, who are in the know, look at it and say, oh yeah, well, she is using the style of a children program to speak about something else. Would you show that in sort of children television program? Probably not. Yeah? Why? Because, what do you think?
Because the content would be considered inappropriate. Or inappropriate the way that it's approached, because if you look at the children's sexual education programs and the bees, it has a certain way of masking.
Good, good. Now let's watch another one from this series, and all of them are really great. Let's see. Some of them I never even saw. I think they keep multiplying. Let's see this. The snail is good.
If I were a snail, I would have one big slimy foot. I would twist my body to fit inside my shell. My foot would end up at the bottom, allowing me to crawl. My anus would end up on top of my head. Unfortunately, I can withdraw my entire body into my shell. Where I can hide my vagina and my penis. I have both. I can produce darts. I use them to inflict pain on my partners before mating. It turns me on. I like to be hurt too. Ah! Sadomasochism excites me.
Are you any clearer what we are talking about? And
I think the institution of education, like for children, is obviously masked. And while this is just telling you the reality of these two animals, like we don't want it to it's showing that children aren't allowed to learn exactly what's happening in the real world because it's part of the system.
And what they are learning instead. So you are saying, man, you are saying when children are watching programs about bees or snails, it's not because we, the adults, the people who write these programs, want them to really understand about bees. Actually, we don't care at all about bees. What we want them to learn about? Sorry?
I think that we're trying to sort of train them into operating in the system. Like for instance, as Chomsky said, the cause.
Decent. So it's into this decency and normality.
Yeah.
So you remember the one of the you remember the bees? What did it tell us about, for instance, gender?
Fertilized eggs. I would have compound eyes to see
The males fight for the
oil
female.
jelly that would make her fertile. Wouldn't have a father, and I would be called a drone. I would have many brothers, and we would do nothing, just waiting to have sex. A female ready to mate. Sex.
Wow.
Yeah, what else?
Both the roles of male and female.
So it's not the bees really. No?
Some Oedipic complexes.
Okay. So perhaps one way we could read Isabella Rossellini's work here is that she kind of makes the argument that these very innocent programs about bees or snails that we just leave the children in front of the television unsupervised to watch, because clearly it was designed by specialists, educators, professors of normality, as Foucault was saying earlier. Yeah? These programs teach certain norms about what males are supposed to be doing. The female role is the baby, giving it the jelly, The male is sex, is fighting, copulating. So somehow, in watching the program about bees, the children also learn what is their respective role in life going to be.
But at the same time, she has obviously the one with the hamster, which the mother eats, the hamster mother eats the baby. So she starts in the jail. I will not be in jail. Because the hamster are not going to be in jail by killing my baby.
Yes, yeah.
So this would be the opposite, right?
So we watch that.
Yeah.
This one, yeah?
I am not a monster. Yes, I killed my baby and ate him. It was my 10th child. I was exhausted. If I had been an hamster, he would have been considered natural. If I were an hamster. It's me who decides how many babies I can raise. A baby. feed them all. This one is cute. It has long legs. It will run fast. This one has big ears. It will hear miles away. This one is so small and skinny. What will be of it? It's a good morsel to recoup some vitamin and protein that I lost during childbirth. It will give me strength to take care of the other babies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 8 is enough. If I were an hamster, I would not be in prison. I would have not been considered a monster, but a good administrator of my strength, abilities, and resources.
Okay. So, now, advanced question. How do you relate Rossellini's work to Foucault, to what we just discussed and read in Foucault?
By introducing a possibility of another world.
That another world is possible. How? Can you explain?
So what's doing it with the beast is introducing this idea of gender reversal, like role reversal of gender. Saying that the man's only job is to, the only reason he needs to live is to have sex and procreate. With this, she's basically trying to say that it's a woman's, it's her sort of choice of whether she wants to have kids or not. So she's changing like this whole societal norms. With Foucault, that's what he's saying that we don't realize that there is this power over it. It's there. And unless you actually are aware of it and take control of that power that's being used against you, which is what she's trying to do.
Okay. I want to ask a slightly different question then, which is, we learned from Foucault that the society, the modern society, is based around discipline. And the discipline is not limited to the prison, the place where discipline is really visible, or the army, where obviously everyone is to be disciplined. He says discipline, you remember, is continuous, uninterrupted, and it's present everywhere. You remember that? Yeah? You remember also that in the discussion with Chomsky, he was saying it's not the visible operations of power that are of interest, but the ones where power operates in the ones that look on the face of them quite innocent. Okay, so you remember that. Now, how do you relate that to what Isabella Rossellini is doing? What, in a sense, is there any way to connect the question of power to these videos? How? Max?
In the discipline of the nature, of everything have a specific role and everything have a specific type, but in a way we don't consider it as discipline.
Yeah. Who is being disciplined?
The bees, the snake.
Not the bees. No, not the bees. Foucault is not interested in the bees. Nor is Rossellini interested in the bees. Who is being who is being disciplined in these videos?
Kids.
The child. That's right. Because that really is a criticism, if you like, of children television, but by implication of other forms of education. Yeah. Well, what is this children television? What are these programs about this? We talk about, as someone said, 0 to 4 or 5-year-old before school. Yeah. This kind of, how it's called this age? I forgot. But it's kind of it's the preschool age, when the child is most of the time with the parents, or maybe in the daycare center, and at home watching programs that were made for children. And Isabella Rossellini says, in these programs made for children, this children entertainment, like Teletubbies, like these programs about animals, they are disciplinary mechanisms. They discipline the child. They teach a way of thinking about nature, of course, but also about male and female roles, about what you're supposed to do as a girl, what you're supposed to do as a boy, in what kind of person you're supposed to become when you grow up. So Rossellini is saying that these incredibly naive and simplistic programs are actually powerful forms of discipline. They are like the Shawshank Redemption in that sense. You know, it is an apparatus of power.
So she's making those very threats that Foucault talks about, which are visible through the...
It is economic, because it's one program for all the children. Foucault said, discipline achieves three goals. It's economical, it's uninterrupted, and it is operating throughout society. Yeah? Children program, economical. You shoot it once, it's for all the children. Yeah? It is uninterrupted because the child came back from the nursery, sitting home on the sofa. Guess what? Discipline continues. Yeah? And it is everywhere because ostensibly, allegedly, at home, you are free from discipline. You are free to do what you like. Not so, tell us Rossellini and Foucault. Discipline continues through this television screen. But it also, these days, it will be through Minecraft. I don't know. What I want you to understand here is that it seems to me that Rossellini is a very acute reader of Foucault. She completely understands what he is talking about, and she shows how really questions of power operate not in... So, if you're interested in criticizing power, don't go and criticize the police or the government. Look at how a children's program is organized. Yeah, look at entertainment. Look at how medicine is organized. Look at how psychiatry is organized. That's it. That's done. Thank you.